There are many ways that a population can be controlled. One of them is through predator prey relationship. There's also competition between members of different species, as well as competition between members of the same species. Relationships between different organisms affect lots of different um, components of the ecosystem, and it can affect the population of these organisms as well as the abiotic environment in which they live. So, one of the relationships between organisms is the predator prey relationship. So, if the prey number increases, typically the number of predators will increase afterwards due to an increase in food. So, the offspring have a greater chance of survival because their parents can provide them with more food, or there's just more food in the environment for them to access. If the prey numbers decrease, the number of predators will soon decrease again due to lack of food. And then this relationship will continue. Once the predator number decreases, there's less pressure on the prey, and then their number will increase again. So Gauss's principle is that if two populations of organisms occupy the same ecological niche, one of the populations will be eliminated. So again, a niche is a role in the environment, not where an organism lives. Because these two organisms that have the same niche will have competition between them. So we can have interspecific competition, and this is the competition between two different species. So this would be like competition between elk and moose, or white-tailed deer and mule deer, or geese and swans for, let's say, nesting sites and food sources. Then we have intra-specific competition, and this is the competition between animals or organisms of the same species. So the competition between two different mule deer bucks for mates, or the competition between two different robins for a nesting site. Animals, when they're looking to avoid predation, have two main ways to avoid predation. One is camouflage, or trying to hide. So this adaptation in form or shape leads to an organism better able to avoid a predator. So whether it's you're tucking yourself into your environment, like the lizard, or you maybe rabbits will change color in the spring and fall to better match their environment. So white in the winter and brown in the summer. Mimicry, or trying to look like another organism, is when a, say, non-toxic organism will attempt to look like a toxic similar organism to avoid predation. So monarch butterflies taste bitter because they eat milkweed and therefore are not prime prey species. And viceroy butterflies try to look like monarch butterflies so they don't get eaten. This also happens with different types of snake species, where they'll try to look like a venomous snake so that they're less likely to get preyed upon by other species. And animals have different relationships with one another, and these are symbiotic relationships. So organisms that live in a close association, and there are three main types. So one is parasitism, and in parasitism, the host is harmed, and the parasites obtained nourishment from their host, but they don't intend to kill their host because the host is their source of nutrients. But often the host is affected in a detrimental way. So ticks are parasites, mosquitoes, ringworm, and organisms can survive with like a small number of ticks on them. But in the winter, for example, moose will have an infestation of ticks on them. And because they spend so much time trying to itch the ticks off their body, they end up rubbing hair off their body. They get cold. They don't spend enough time eating. And often those moose will die due to side effects from the tick infestation, even if the ticks don't directly kill them. Another relationship is commensalism. This is where one organism is unharmed and the other organism benefits. So this would be birds that eat insects that will be kicked up in the dust and from the grasses following the movement of animals, or barnacles that grow on whales because they can travel around the ocean and get filter feed, but the whale isn't harmed, but the whale also doesn't benefit. And then mutualism is a relationship where both organisms benefit. So in the alligator image, it would be the bird is getting nutrients by picking out food from between the alligator's teeth, and the alligator has cleaner teeth. Similar to the birds on the antelope, The birds are picking bugs out of the antelope so they get food, and the antelope has a cleaner skin. And then also bees, birds, and butterflies and the relationship with flowers, where the flowers get pollinated and the other species get a food source. Looking at how an ecosystem changes during its development is known as succession. And this is the slow, orderly progress of replacing one community with another during development. And it ends by reaching a climax community. And different ecosystems have different climax communities. We can have a prairie climax community, a parkland forest climax community, a boreal forest climax community, a desert climax community. And this all depends on the amount of water and the ambient temperature in the area. Now, there are two primary types of succession, or two types of succession. One is primary succession, and this occurs in an area where no community previously existed. There's no soil present. It starts on rock. So this would be on a newly formed volcanic island. It could be after a volcanic eruption and the climax community is completely destroyed and bare rock is left in its place. It could be due to a landslide as well. So primary succession starts with the pioneer species, and these would be first soil has to form and the rocks have to break down with lichens. Then we have small annual plants, grasses and other perennials, small trees and shrubs that are shade intolerant, so they need a lot of sun. And then finally the climax community, which would be shade tolerant trees such as, in this case, oak and hickory, but it depends on your ecosystem. So in Alberta, we'll have lots of like aspen and poplar. And pine and spruce trees. Secondary succession occurs following the complete or partial destruction of a community, but soil is still left behind. So the first plants and animals that appear are called a pioneer community, and again, lichens and mosses. But like I said, soil is still already there. Pioneer communities develop into seral communities with shrubs and grasses. You'll often see fireweed in kind of mountain and forest areas, and in prairie areas, it'll be bright green grass that grows. The climax community is then formed when there's a high survival rate of all the species, trees, shrubs, grasses, etc., depending on what type of environment is there to allow for different plant species to grow. So here we have secondary succession. It occurred after a fire. It can also occur after, say, logging or a flood in a certain area. Our pioneer species are then going to be those annual plants, then followed by grasses and perennials, shrubs and shade intolerant species, followed by the climax community, which depending on the plant species can exist for 150 or more years. So like spruce trees can live for hundreds of years, where aspen and poplar have decades long lifespan before they are replaced by new trees. So our process of succession is where the species competition will change more rapidly during the earlier stages of succession. So we'll move to those grasses, to those annual plants, to those shrubs within a couple years, where we move from the shade intolerant plants to the shade tolerant plants over kind of more like several decades, and then the climax community can last for centuries. And the total number of species is going to increase dramatically during the early stages and then begin to level off during the intermediate stages and declines when the climax community is established. And different food webs exist in these different environments, and they become more complex and more clearly defined as the succession proceeds. So what's very important about having different ecosystems in different areas, so we had a forest fire that went through one area and a climax community in a different, is that it allows different organisms to find a new niche in a new area. And often it's those intermediate stages that have the most biodiversity. So lastly, we're going to look at life pattern histories. So a life pattern history shows the population cycles that include growth and decline and occur in many different populations. So snowshoe hare and lynx have cycles of predator and prey that last about 11 years. So it'll be about every 11 years, there'll be a burst of snowshoe hare population, which will be followed by a burst of a lynx population. And then the snowshoe hare population will fall and the lynx will fall afterwards. So population histogram is a population growth curve to show how the population changes over time, but not the age distribution of the members. With population histograms, we're able to predict how a population will grow, stabilize, or decline. We can see them in an age pyramid where a wide base is characterized by a rapidly growing population because there's more young individuals. This indicates a high number of offspring, and it also shows the number of animals capable of reproduction. If we have a stabilized population, we typically will have a medium based pyramid and a medium middle of the pyramid, and then the top would be a little bit smaller. And in a declining population, we'll often see the largest portion of the population in the middle or upper ranges of that histogram, showing that there's not going to be as many individuals available for reproduction in the future. So population histograms with narrower bases are approaching zero population growth. So if we see the one on the left here is Sweden, and it has a much more narrow base than the middle section, showing it could be a declining population growth or it could be a stable population growth, depending exactly what happens over the next few years. This is due to industrial revolution, technology advances in medicine and weather, versus the population of Mexico, which is growing rapidly due to an increase of birth rate, so that we can see there are many more individuals at the bottom three levels of that age histogram than there is at the top. So that's our lesson on population interactions and changes. Take care. Bye.